I think we are going to turn some of the fans on to make this slightly more comfortable. I understand it's getting a little warm in here. I'm very happy to have this conversation with this brilliant panel. And it's a very interesting conversation to have at a time like this. I spent some time staring at the topic with a little bit of heartbreak. The suggestion of fiction and spaces in between in the same sentence as journalism is actually heartbreaking and obviously something the profession has brought on itself. There should be no fiction and no spaces in between. On day one in journalism school, they teach you that journalism falls in the non-fiction category, and that's non-negotiable. But I think that we've got to this point somehow. And so the questions that I have in my mind is how we got here, and how are we ever going to make our way back? And that's largely what I want to focus this conversation on with my panel. Ruben, I'll start with you if I may. One of the things that most people talk about right now is pressure. Whether it's the pressure of business models, or the pressure of those people who own those business models and own the organizations, or it's political pressure. In your experience as a journalist, has any of that changed, gotten better, gotten worse? Are we in a different environment now than we were when you started?
Of course, we are in a different world, and being an editor, I'd like to edit the topic. It should be more fiction, less fact. In fact, that is how it should be. But then we have come to this. There are good owners, there are bad owners. Of course, there has always been pressure, and possibly the pressure is more pronounced now because we are living in an extremely divisive society where we don't tend to agree on almost everything. But I think what we don't talk about necessarily, and I know that dog does not eat dog's meat, but then I have reached a stage where I can speak my mind out and I don't really care. I think one of the biggest drawbacks, the shortcomings of our profession has been newsrooms have got politicized. Okay. We all know what politicians talk about. It's essentially lies. And now these transformed journalists are talking spewing at lies. And that is where the challenge lies. Because you have a political newsroom now. Now, to a great extent, I'm not saying that every newsroom has become political, but by and large, that's the biggest challenge that we face.
Why do you feel that's happened?
It's every other institution in this country has eroded, declined, and so has the media, the so-called fourth pillar. And generally, there has been a decline in the standards. Maybe the quality of leadership has gone down. We don't have editors like what we used to have earlier. Like maybe we are not able to measure up to the exacting standards of our peers, like good or bad, but then that is how it is. So we are not being able to be the kind of role models that we ought to be. We should be leading by example. But when you have the top editors turning political or compromising or not doing fact checks, then you have a serious problem in hand.
And enough is being written about media having abdicated its position of being the conscience of our democracy or our society. Just a raise of hands if you believe that the media has compromised. Was that the word you used? Ouch. Okay. All right, then. I think the discussion's over. All right. Sonia, there's one other reality that we must face. When people say mainstream media, they invariably mean the loudest of it, which is television. Would you say it would be fair to say at this point that television has largely given everything a bad name?
Faye, let me begin by saying fiction, somehow the word fiction often has something romanticized about it. I think we should first identify the problem and call it out for what it is. It is fake news, and the worst kind of fake news, a fake news which is now being politicized and weaponized, not just by the media, but by government and highest government offices to discriminate against people. So somehow fiction makes it sound like, okay, maybe someone made something up or they got it wrong. Here we are seeing a concerted effort by people to actually put out a fact which they know is wrong, to put out a lie, and then repeat it 1,000 times. Now, we've seen this happen before. I won't go into other examples, but we saw it happen during the emergency. We saw the same issues with the media came up then as well. And even then, there were heroic outliers. Ruben made that point about owners, and I do have to say at this point, and I don't want to say, that I work with a company which I would say the owners are heroic because they face the prospect of going to jail because of journalism. Yet, we have people like Ravish and many other organizations, Rajdeep, who I think Ravish made that point that I have never been asked by my boss, what are you reporting today? And I think that freedom, which is now it's almost a shrinking island, perhaps. I mean, I don't again want to say, but maybe in NDTV and some others, I would say there are some others which support that. That is what is needed today. The model is broken. And I think Raghuram Rajan made that point, that as long as media in India depends on the government of the day for government ad revenue, today the media is an opposition to the government. It's almost, you have the same playbook, for instance, Akhilesh Yadav or Mayawati is troubling you, file a CBI case. NDTV is troubling you, file a CBI case. To then report facts becomes even more important. And I think at that point is when it really is important that we look at how do we get our viewers to be part of the engagement to say, we want news, we want facts. That's what's going to alter it at the end of the day. Why do we not have NRC today? Because we saw spontaneous protests come up to say we will not accept this. And just looking at that point on facts, we were going to, the Home Minister of India said in Parliament, we will have a National Register of Citizens. We asked our reporters, how many illegal immigrants has the government said there are? What is the data on what they're basing this? Our reporter of the Home Ministry went every day for a week after this was announced in Parliament. The Home Ministry said, we don't know. We don't know how many illegal immigrants there are in India. We went to UP, how many cases have you filed against illegal immigrants or Bangladeshi complaints in the last 5 years? 209 complaints in 5 years in UP. Calculating that's 0.0001% of the population. So you are going to start an exercise which in just Assam has cost you 1,600 crores across India. Multiply that into UP's population with no facts. That's what we're actually battling with today. It's not just about some reporter giving a wrong fact in his 9 o'clock news. It's about a large-scale disruption, the scale of which India would not have seen before. And we need facts before we do that.
Very well said. Taran is here, and the only independent voice or the independent journalist, which comes with a very different perspective on what we're doing right now. We were talking about the squeezing of budgets. And as a result of the squeezing of budgets, journalists, reporters, both independent, inside organizations and outside, are not given the time or the luxury to spend time on stories, to actually go travel. There's always a question of, can you phone it in? Can you just make a couple of calls and figure out what this is without having to physically go there so that we can save money? Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, I'm happy to represent independent, but I can only speak for myself. But yes, as you say, independent journalism, especially I think work by women independent journalists, has contributed so deeply to excellent work. Thank you. In India currently. And of course, it's being affected by all the factors that Sonia and Ruben talked about. And, on the one hand, we have all these ideas, and at least I enter journalism with many ideas about contributing to society, making a change, being part of positive discourse. And then at the same time, you realize that you need a check at the end of the month to pay the bill. And really, journalism isn't going to be enough, or on its own, it's not going to be enough. So as an independent journalist, if I need to look for other gigs, if I have to be a part of this hustler kind of idea that, I have to do this, but also find a different way to make some money, how on earth am I going to be able to contribute the kind of effort, the kind of concerted thinking, the kind of commitment it needs to unravel stories in India today? It's just simply not going to work. So, you really need to let journalists do their jobs. We need to give them time. We need to let them commit mind space. We need to let them not worry about whether they'll be able to make rent at the end of the month, and tell the stories that, as an independent journalist, I've made a commitment to following through my career.
This is a harsh reality, and I totally agree, because our budgets have come under pressure. market is very bad, and after all, we are not in charity. Finally, we'll have to make money to survive. So budgets have come under pressure. We are cutting corners, and but at the same time, I still see a lot of hope, because if your heart is at the right place, I have never come across an occasion when my reporter has come and said that I have this story and I see a great story and I have not allowed that reporter to go there. Like, if there is a story, of course you will spend, and there can't be. But yes, also at the same time, like, though the media is always looking out, or at least the people who are still practicing honest journalism, they are chasing stories which are worthwhile. But it isn't only about content. Earlier we were told that content is king. Like, you do a good story and it will sell. It doesn't sell anymore. Now I'm told by my marketing guy that distribution is queen. And maybe that is the reason why I'm here, because I'm marketing Outlook. Okay. So just bringing out good content is not good enough in present times. You also got to market it. So it's...
We're seeing that politically as well, Ruben, that's everywhere now.
And if we combine that with what you said earlier, Sonia, about the fact that there is fake news coming from the highest offices of our country. For example, we talked about this a little while ago when the Prime Minister said that there is no detention centers, and there are obviously detention centers. So when he said there's been no mention of NRC at all in my government, and there were at least 7 on record, on camera mentions that people had.
In fact,
and then what happens is there is this entire infrastructure on social media that picks that up and amplifies it, hoping that if you say something often enough, enough of times, it becomes the truth.
In fact, I just want to categorize fake news in 3 different ways, if you like. The first, as you said, the Prime Minister said in his speech, which was seen as a rollback after Amit Shah said in Parliament that the NRC would come in. And of course, he said that famous line, "Aap chronology samajhiye." So So the problem is, in this time, you can't go back and delete those words. So you're right. The Home Minister has said on 8 times at least in bites that the NRC will follow the CA and they're linked. The Home Ministry, the government in Parliament, and this including under UP Times, 8 times said that the NPR will be linked to an NRC. The Prime Minister said there are no detention centers. On that same day, journalists, not just of NDTV, showed in Assam the detention centers. In Karnataka, there's a detention center coming up. In Maharashtra, the government has cleared land for a detention center. There are detention centers coming up. Hopefully, the media focus has stopped that for now. But just look at what happened right now in Bangalore. You had over 100 people, the poorest of the poor slums, raised overnight because a BJP MLA tweeted saying ye illegal Bangladeshi immigrants hai. The police and a cooperator razed their houses. There were school-going children in there who had to go to school the next morning. Their books were thrown on the road. Now the court has said, forget Bangladeshi immigrants. They were from North Karnataka. They had never spoken Bengali. They had never heard of Bangladesh. But they're thrown out of their homes. That's just one example. What is the recourse that will be done? If it happened in a middle-class household, there would be some compensation. They will get no compensation. They've gone back to wherever they've come from, Assam, Bihar, Bengal. They've gone back. Then you have the very systematic web attacks you point on social media, which is done on people and journalists who have a voice. I cannot tell you the number of fake news that has been spread, which says that I am the second wife of RPN Singh. There's nothing wrong with being a second wife. I can be 10th wife, but I'm not. But then you have WhatsApp groups of schools are coming up and saying, Mama, they say you're the second wife of Daddy. Who's the first wife? So then the joke is that they'll tease me and say, oh, is it someone from NDTV also, another channel? So I'll say, stop it. But this is not funny. There'll be things which say that NDTV is corrupt. Sonia has taken 200 crores. My mother-in-law will get the WhatsApp and call up and say, what is this beta? Now, this is silly things, but multiply that into 100. It's not me. You'll get it. Ravish will get it. Barkha will get it. Rajdeep will get it. Rajdeep gets the social media head of BJP, says, is he the PR for ISIS? These have dangerous implications. It's not a kind of an innocent thing.
Yeah, and we will talk about how women, specifically women from minority communities, receive horrific trolling, and the worst things are said. But we would be making a massive mistake to assume that any of this is fun or accidental or just stupid.
Exactly.
For example, a comment saying the construction laborers outside my house are eating poha, and that's why I think they're Bangladeshis. was funny for a day because everybody said, ha ha ha, everybody eats poha. But it's a very serious us versus them idea, seed to plant in people's heads, because now everybody's looking out of their window saying, where are the Bangladeshis? Let me try and identify them. This is dangerous.
And who is the us versus them? Who defines who's us and them? Every day it changes. Well, sometimes you're part, if you're allied with the government, you're us. If you break up with them, you're them. The Shiv Sena and BJP alliance is one of that. One day, I've seen many things in journalism, but I never thought I'd see the day when Uddhav Thackeray seems moderate compared to the BJP. So I have to say, it's really, the world is changing.
Actually, I mean, I think the only way to describe it is that the Shiv Sena and BJP are the Ross and Rachel of Indian politics. You can never tell when they're on again and off again and when they're on a break, but apparently they're on a break. But I want to go back to various instances, and people have written about how Indian media has failed in various instances. For me, I think, and this is a non-political example, but it's a very stark example, and I remember the day that we got information that Sridevi had passed away in Dubai. Right? And I remember categorically what was happening on other channels at that time. There were bathtubs, and they were measuring how tall she was and whether she would fit in a bathtub, insinuations that she might have been murdered. Some went as far as to suggest that she might have been murdered by her husband. And there was no evidence. You were there as well. There was no evidence at all. 1 year has passed. There's been no accountability, no apology, no sort of answer or question asked from the journalists who did that. So there's this impunity with which people are just doing whatever they please, with the attempt that, people forget about it tomorrow when it's done, and there's no accountability. I got today's ratings, or I got whatever I needed out of this story. And like Sonia very rightly said, there are lives at stake. There are human beings behind all of these stories that you're treating badly. And somewhere there, and this has happened when 370 happened in Kashmir, the truth was not being reported. When Uttar Pradesh police excess was happening, the truth was not being reported. So over and over again, and with every instance, it becomes more and more serious. Are we going to a place, and this is to all three of you, are we going to a place where we won't be able to come back?
Well, I'm an optimist. Things are really going from bad to worse, but I still think that India is a resilient country, and there are enough number of good journalists in this country. Like, we might be outnumbered right now, but there is still honest journalism happening, and I think we need to go back to the basics. And we have also got our act wrong slightly, because it's not only about one particular party or the other. It's about being impartial and neutral. And that is somewhere we have gone wrong, because we have been taking sides. And we have not been very uniform in our approach. Like, it's just not BJP, whatever is happening. Like, we last week did a cover story on police abuses, excesses. Like, is it only happening in Delhi? No, it's happening. You go to Bengal, it's happening in Bengal. It's happening in Orissa, it's happening in Tamil Nadu. It's happening everywhere. But are we calling, we are being selective in our outrage. And that is where we are losing, the media is losing trust and credibility. We need to go back to our trenches, and we have to get back, rediscover our basics. Like, why are we in this profession? Not for money. Of course, livelihoods are important, but we don't make as much money as others do. But it's the best obtainable version of the truth. That is what we are chasing. And that is where I think we have let our guards down. And we should get it back.
Is it possible to go back?
I don't think we have any option but to go forward. So going back isn't really feasible. But I do feel that we really have no choice but to continue doing our jobs as best as we can. And I personally feel the best way to achieve a correction of this sort is to encourage and sustain diversity in the kind of people who tell the news stories, and help at a personal level mentor people, say, from diverse backgrounds, from underprivileged backgrounds, from minorities, from Dalit communities, all the people who create the news. And the traditional understanding of journalism is giving a voice to the voiceless, which I find deeply patronizing and problematic in many ways. So why not have everyone have a voice and have many voices speaking, telling their truth to people? I feel that's a very, very powerful, potent idea, and it's already happening. I mean, look around you, everyone is raising their voices. And I think that's wonderful. So there is certainly a need for correction, but not for despair, I think. And yeah, India, as Ruben said, it is a resilient country. And more than that, if we accept defeat, then of course it's a foregone conclusion. So that should definitely not happen.
Sonia, where do we go from here?
No, I think trust and credibility, as Ruben said, really are the key bedrock of all journalism across. And I think, you know, in one way, when we saw this plethora of news channels exploding, I mean, for a long while it was Doordarshan, then NDTV, and then we saw many news channels coming by former colleagues of mine, and I was quite excited because I thought it's nice to have a plethora of different voices. And I do feel that in that sense, the news space has been democratized, and I think that's very good. You've got different voices, different regional voices emerging. But I think also this creation of the anchor as a celebrity has damaged the cause of journalism in a sense, because it becomes the point which you made about talk. Talk is cheap. So if you have the same anchor talking for 10 hours, it's even cheaper. It's only the anchor's salary. So I think that is something we need to really look at and examine. But I just wanted to come back to those issues of when certain issues are picked up. And I think this targeting of individuals is something which is extremely frightening, which is happening a lot on television. So we saw it, which happened with Kanhaiya Kumar and the Tukre Tukre gang, where fake videos were put out of something he didn't actually say. We saw it again in this JNU girl, Aishi Ghosh, and the stitches which disappeared, which came back. Then we currently have, and this is again what journalism is needed for. Social media will put out the fact that she got injured, but 2 weeks later, we still don't have the arrest of the people who did it. In fact, she has an FIR against her. That's what you need journalism for, to keep bringing up those points. Don't forget the story. Stay with the story. What has happened, investigate what happened. So social media is fantastic in terms of amplifying voices, putting out what's happened. When JNU happened, the videos came from social media. So Jammu and Kashmir, any government, and I think Ruben's right, you don't have to talk with just this government, any government would be smart to shut down the internet, because that's how you make sure no one sees, the world doesn't see what's happening. In JNU, they couldn't shut down the internet because it was in Delhi. That's how we saw what was happening. So the freedom of information is crucial. It could be your students' kids there, tomorrow's students. We have to realize how important an internet shutdown is. It represents the stifling of information, which is a fundamental right under the Constitution of India. The Supreme Court has said it. The social internet is a fundamental right. Freedom of speech on the internet is our fundamental right. So that's what we need to be really stressing on.
Sonia is absolutely right. But my worry is, like when with this case of Aishi Ghosh, you have an anchor shouting, criminal, criminal, criminal. That is worrisome. And what worries me equally is when a big newspaper chain tells its editors that if there is a pro-CAA protest, don't play it up. That is equally worrying for me. Why should it be? If there is a protest, report. You are, after all, you are chasing facts. Like, if Aishi is being wronged, even this editorial call is wrong. So that is where we must keep our perspective, and that is where we are going wrong. We are not being impartial. We are taking sides. Say BJP does something right, what's the problem? Say good.
Is the taking sides happening on the level of the editor, or is it coming from the office upstairs?
See, there is a lot of self-censorship going on. Like, I don't know. Like, I have a very non-interfering owner. I've been lucky. My owners don't even get to see my magazine before it hits the stands, and that is how it is. So I can't really vouch for what's happening elsewhere. But I think, as I said, newsrooms are polarized, editors are polarized, politicized. So they themselves are currying favors. And like, I'm relatively new to Delhi, and when I was being briefed about who all are in the media, like, I used to know that this journalist covers BJP, that journalist covers Congress. Now, the way I was briefed, this journalist works for BJP, that journalist works for Congress. Come on, how can that be? And it's equally true with editors. There are many editors who I know they are politically compromised. Come on.
But just on this point, you made a pro-CA protest, because the Prime Minister said the other day again that, you know, every day there are pro-CA protests happening, you don't see that in the media. So I asked our reporters, all our bureau reporters, I said, where are these pro-CA protests? I'd like to see them. So at that point, they sent me a list of whatever. So the pro-CA protests were usually BJP organized political protests as opposed to spontaneous. We carried them. I think Rajnath Singh spoke and made a very important statement there. We carried them. But what we found, and I think this was in the same bulletin I anchored, so I thought that was a nice mix when you talk about that, that in Uttar Pradesh, and this fact is true, that the benefit to the BJP of CAA has been immense politically. So when we keep wondering, neither the Prime Minister nor the Home Minister are very shrewd electorally, we have to accept the fact that politically right now in the Hindi heartland states of Uttar Pradesh, it is benefiting them greatly. That is why they're going through with it. They're not going through it for any other reason. Yet, there are anti-CA protests outside UP, which are the Shaheen Bagh and other places, which are there because there is a larger spectrum of people who feel that is anti the constitution. Now, they may well be the minority. In majority, politically, it may affect the BJP. Those are the different 360 perspective of a story, which I think we do have to report, and we are. Those are the complex issues of it. But I'm not sure that it's as black and white as people saying don't cover pro-CA, cover, because pro-CA is not some spontaneous thing like it has been so far in anti-CA. Politically, right now, in states like Uttar Pradesh, it is benefiting the BJP, in fact, the anti-CA protest. So it's a complex model. It's a complex story to report, and you're right, we need to be as fair as possible in reporting all these aspects.
I also want to talk to you, Darren, about the spaces in between, which is the third portion of our topic. In my mind right now, the other challenge we're facing as an industry is the fact that there's only one story at a time that's hot, right? So it's either CA or, before that it's something else. But all of the other smaller or the quieter stories get ignored or don't get enough space, don't get commissioned, don't get budgets because they're not in the eye at this point, they're not hot at this point. What has been your experience?
Quite simply, it's hard to write any story which doesn't have a news peg. And I write a lot of long-form work. I try to spend time with my subjects, and it's extremely difficult to find the budgets for that. If I pitch it directly to a magazine, especially in India, or even to a newspaper, it's almost impossible, I would say. But at the same time, I think there are different formats which I find quite encouraging. Like there are, for example, podcasts that are coming up that can explore these kind of questions. And I think these are all interesting spaces in between that are emerging that could help journalism explore different ways of storytelling. And my personal experience is that when we talk about journalism, and I build on this tradition of very rigorous attention to detail and facts, I also feel that journalists like myself who work with longer form or who like to experiment a little within the format, and that's one of the reasons why I left newsroom journalism, was because I enjoyed experimenting with form a little bit. I feel stories which are embedded in reality, which are rooted in journalism, sometimes can be told in a more thoughtful way if I use the tools of fiction. For example, if I can make a connection between what I see on the ground in Jaipur or in Delhi or in Bihar or in Chhattisgarh to a story I read from a completely different time, or I may be a journalist writing about Sri Lanka, or maybe a journalist writing about Europe at a different time. And can I use this moment that I'm seeing here, that I'm witnessing in India as a journalist, can I use it to transcend this distance and speak to that moment? I think that tells the story, the truth of this moment in a larger way. It opens it up. And to me, this is doing the job of being a journalist as well. So I feel that I enjoy this freedom. Of course, it's hard to find the space for this, but this is a moment where I feel it's becoming possible, and maybe there are more immersive forms of writing text that go along with audio. There are images that can work with text. There are many, many different forms that are emerging, which I personally find quite promising. And I think these are maybe directions where journalists can explore being able to communicate what they feel is going on in a more thoughtful, less hot topic way.
Ruben?
I think what you said is particularly, possibly maybe true for TV. For print, it's not necessarily so, but I would acknowledge that in print particularly, what has happened is we suffer from two things. One is general lack of ideas. We have run out of ideas, bankruptcy of ideas. And I fall within that category. I am not saying that I am bubbling with ideas. And two, we also suffer from a sense of self-righteousness. We are not willing to listen to others. Like whatever the editor has decided, and that is the line. And that is the problem. I think these two we'll have to fight.
Sonia, in television?
I think the current television financing model is broken, and I think that's something which has to be completely changed. In fact, now anyway, I don't say that I work just for television, but we work for a news organization where our biggest ways of broadcasting is actually YouTube, online, more than a traditional television screen. The phone is where we are watched and watched extensively in parts across India where you don't even have television distribution. But we have to realize that ultimately the inherent contradiction of journalism as public service underpinned by private sector money. There's a contradiction there. We have to figure out a way where you don't oscillate between government ad revenue, which is by the whim of the government of the day, and it's the same whether that's Congress or BJP. They're both, when they come to power, behave exactly the same way in terms of wanting to control the media. And whether it's private sector, which are then frightened that have you offended the government of the day. So it becomes a vicious cycle. Do we look at some kind of foundations, which can, independent media foundations to which perhaps is a trust, which either whether it's a donation or whether the government decides to set up a foundation which looks at media funding. But this current model is broken. It needs to be fixed. The faster, the better.
Just so I can allot adequate time, do we have any questions? Okay. Can we switch to questions? We get the mic across, please, to this young man here.
Good afternoon, and it was a very interesting panel, and it was really enjoyable experience for me. My question is, sensationalism is the root cause. It's a huge problem in today's media, right? Because most of the stories, like as you mentioned, the Tukde Tukde gang and the Kanhaiya Kumar issues have been sensationalized, which is really problematic. However, there's also a certain level of sensationalism which is required in reporting as well. And I'd like all your opinions on how much sensationalism is considered okay or safe for reporting.
See, I don't think, as you said, there has to be sense in the sensationalism, otherwise it'll fail. So I think people realize that as well, that, when you're covering, whether it's Sridevi in the bathtub or whether it's an anchor dressing up as Lord Ram to report the Yodhya verdict, there has to be sense in the sensationalism, otherwise we're crazy. And we have a News Broadcasters Association. I often say that some of the channels should be in the entertainment category, not in the news. I find it crazy that they're in the news category. But I think also we do have to realize, and I think this is maybe a more traditional view, that news should not be boring. And I think especially with young people, and I think we are watching, we have to adapt to a new dialogue on conversation in the way they talk and think nowadays. So in a way, the internet has made news more accessible and has made television news and print news realize that they have to actually become more conversational, more clear, more lucid. Talking in big words or writing something in a way no one understands doesn't make it good journalism. It's the opposite of good journalism. And I think that's the challenge we all face. And often the sensationalism or the hype is to cover up the fact that you're reporting nothing of substance. If you have substance, you report it clearly and lucidly. That is good journalism, and I hope that viewers more and more recognize that. I have to say, if we went by TRPs, NDTV shouldn't exist. It's viewers who are the people who make us exist today. Even people have written to us saying we want to crowdfund for NDTV. So that is the thing that makes us realize that, okay, maybe we do matter. Forget TRPs, we matter. We have credibility ratings, and I hope that's what's important.
So if I were to just differentiate the two words for you, news should be compelling. It should be interesting. It should be written well. It should be edited well. It should look good. It should sound good. The audio should be edited properly. It should be compelling and interesting for the person who's watching it. When you say sensational, we should differentiate from when you sort of exaggerate, make stuff up, stretch your information to hold someone's attention. So there has to be a clear differentiation. There's no need to sensationalize. There is a need to make it compelling. If I may be slightly partial and give the mic to a young lady over there in the red sweater, would you stand up, please?
Hello. So what I want to ask is, because all of these things that are going on, all of these pro-CA, anti-CA protests and all of it, what I mean to ask is, don't you think terminology is very important when news is being reported? Because pro-CA is not a protest. Protest inherently means to go against something, right? So if it's pro-CA, it's basically not a protest. And unless and until journalists use the right terminologies, the people who do not use social media as much will not be exposed to what is actually going on. There are parents and grandparents who are literally not on social medias and who just rely on the news. and they do not know what went on in Jamia or JNU and all of these universities. Right. So what I mean to ask is terminology, how much do you think it matters?
No, it does matter, and a point well taken, absolutely. You made a point, agree. All that I'm saying is like news, the way we should be covering, we should be very objective, and we should see, because in a divided world that we inherit now, we have to take the middle ground and we have to be impartial and neutral, because otherwise no conversation will be happening. We have to give space to everyone equally and be impartial, because that is the only place where you can have a conversation, right? And conversation and dialogue are so important. Then you present the news as the way it is, unadulterated, and then you take an editorial stand. Like for ourselves, we have said it's a partisan law. We have said that. But we have covered everyone. We have given space to all sides. And that is how I believe it should be. But that does not stop me from taking my own opinion, my own view.
All right. Okay, then. We're going to try and speed this up to squeeze in as many questions as possible. The young man here, simply for persistence. Stand up, stand up. Yes.
Hello, ma'am. Ma'am, like I am a student and we organize a protest against CAA with facts. So I want to ask, as just a student, that how has the media killed the humanity? Because one of my partner, she is a woman and she was threatened that she would be punished like Hyderabad rape case. So how do you define that media has killed the humanity while catching their TRPs?
I don't really understand the question.
Threatened by who?
Yeah, like we organize a protest. So
No, but threatened by whom?
like those who support CAA, they said she should be raped like the Hyderabad case. So I want to ask that, is this media's fault that they have killed humanity between people just to get their TRPs?
Is the harshness
I think
come from?
it'd be unfair to blame only the media. I think social media, in a sense, and the kind of abandonment of all boundaries there has played much more of a role. WhatsApp groups, fake news. I mean, we haven't actually, one aspect we haven't had time to touch on, but fake news we saw when people were lynched because they were said that they were child kidnappers. Completely fake, and people lost their lives. So I do think that that's where you actually need media more than ever to debunk these rumors, to say this is unacceptable. Even the Hyderabad the gang rapes and the killings that happened afterwards. Yeah. Now the point is, if media becomes part of those who are cheerleading the police, they may be the murderers, but even, as we said, even Kasab had a fair trial in India. He was caught on camera at CST, yet India gave him a trial, India gave him a lawyer. Now these men who were killed, they may be the worst people, they may deserve to hang, but they have to go through the process of law. And you need media to say that. On social media, the policemen are heroes. In real life, we have to look at what the implications of this are.
Even mainstream media has made the police the hero in Hyderabad.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact,
unfortunately.
Regional media, yeah, but I would
unfortunately.
think some channels have.
In fact, those of us who said that these men should have been put through the process received responses saying, you should be raped, then you will know. So, you know, it has become harsh. And I believe it has, and there is a conversation at 5:30 on this matter, and I believe that social media has a very large part to play in the kind of things that people are saying to each other. I mean, I doubt anyone would say this to me if they were standing in front of me, but they don't think twice when typing it out on social media, and I think there's something broken there. The gentleman with a very impressive mustache.
If I may add,
yes, please.
Sorry, you said something interesting. The person who asked the question said that we organized a protest with facts, and I think you got at something very interesting, that this is a two-way process. You know, this isn't just the media telling you things. You don't have to believe it. Media literacy is a very, very powerful tool, and I think education, and I'm seeing this a lot more now, is like people are circulating tools to educate yourself. It's a kind of a teach-in, virtual teach-in. This is really important. I mean, you have to know the facts. You can't be passive consumers of the media and then say, oh my God, what's happening? This is everyone's responsibility, and the tools are at our disposal. So let's focus on that also a little bit.
Yes. Good afternoon.
Very good afternoon to the panelists.
Good afternoon, sir.
My question is, at this juncture that we are in, how much of the media is truly independent? Because there is a strong public perception, and we all request an honest answer. There's a strong public perception that the major influencers in the media are compromised or they are sold out. That is why people have to rely on other forms, including the social media, to get some sense of credibility. Because you seem to have abandoned your space, and nature abhors vacuum. So others will rush in and complete your task that is there. It might be half-baked, it might not be complete information, but the fact of the matter is, the mainstream media is biased, heavily compromised, and is divided in camps.
So I think the best judge of the independence of the media has to be you and others as well. I said I can't, since I'm part of that media, but I would just like to say one thing on that, and because this is something we discussed with the BJP a lot, that when the Manmohan Singh government in the last few years, it was NDTV where I think whether it was Smriti Irani or Nirmala Sitharaman or every BJP person came on our channel to attack the government, and they were a very strong vocal opposition. In fact, I think Smriti Irani, we've joked about this, they all came to power because of the platform and the questions asked to them by the media, the questions of allegations of scams, whether it was the 2G scam or any other scam, all came out on the media against a government in power. Now today, for the government which is currently in power to turn around and say that, oh, the media is biased, is ironic given the fact that they were very much part of the... How would you know what the 2G scam otherwise? It was some CAG report buried in some parliament proceeding. Would anyone know or care? The BJP could have had 100 rallies. How would you all know about those rallies? You knew about them because the opposition leaders were given space to come on all media platforms. At that time, there were not so many, mainly NDTV, and make their arguments. Today, to argue that the opposition should not be given that same space, that to speak against the government is anti-national and you have a larger conspiracy or you're compromised, is in a sense fallacious if you just go by the facts of the last 10 years. Now, the final judge do have to be viewers, but I would urge viewers to actually go, look at the last 10 years, look at the criticism faced by previous governments, whether it's UPA, whether it was the United Front, whether it's Mayawati, whether it's Mamata Banerjee and current government, and then be the judge. In fact, I would think that the facts would bear us out. Perceptions are many. Everyone is free to their own opinion, but facts are easily available.
But not everything is lost as yet. I fully agree with you when you say that, yes, possibly honest journalism is being outflanked and outnumbered or outmaneuvered by others, but still good journalism is happening. Like, look at last 1 year. Like this data fudging in Business Standard. Great journalism that happened. Like, we don't tend to remember such excellence, right? But good, solid journalism is still happening, and not everyone has surrendered as yet. And when I say that surrendered, it doesn't mean essentially surrendering to the party in power. Surrendering to any temptation. There are still people who are holding out, and that is...
Yes, I just want to point out one thing, and we've talked about... Yes. Yes. We've talked about how there are some channels who've compromised on facts and done it with impunity and no punishment. We also know that as far as advertising is concerned, it goes to the guys with the top 2 TRP lines. And both of those guys are not exactly, in my opinion, the finest journalists at this point. But really, the power lies with you. I've met so many people who turn around and say, but we still watch it for entertainment. Why? Watch Netflix for entertainment. Don't watch news for entertainment. The more you watch, the more you will encourage that behavior. The only person who can punish bad journalism is you, by pulling out your attention span and your viewership from that channel. Stop watching. The numbers need to go down. The influence needs to go down, and that's the only way to make it happen. All of the young people, I know this is a problem for you. Fight with your parents. Disconnect their Tata Sky if you have to. If you feel they're watching channels that are misinforming them, tell them. But it has to be finally, see, you can't have regulation for media because then you compromise what journalism actually needs to do. Journalism has to be self-regulated. And in the absence of that self-regulation, it has to be regulated by you. by the viewer, by the customer. To the young man in the baseball cap, yes.
Oh, yeah. I have two questions. Yes. One is the revenue of the media is diminishing, maybe print media or maybe electronic media. And not only the government, but also private advertisers, they are also decreasing their revenue. In that case, how the media is going to survive? And second question, is there any much decline in the print media as compared to the electronic media? Thank you.
It's a great question.
Even I don't have an answer for you because that's a daily challenge that we face. Yes, ad revenues are under pressure and we are struggling. But let's see. As for a circulation, I still believe that good content sells. And I can vouch that in last 1 year, our own circulation has gone up by 12%. So which I think is a hopeful sign and we can build on that. And I'm sure others are also doing equally well. So.
No, just on that point, I do feel that, and again, this is something which I think has emerged as a new trend. I do think there is an atmosphere of fear sometimes amongst advertisers to be in content which is not seen as appealing. So we'll find lots of advertisers for Jai Jawan, but we won't find advertisers for, say, something which is an investigation program. So we need to, I think, the point of viewers being. So for instance, forget media. We saw Aamir Khan was dropped from Snapdeal after he spoke out against a particular thing. But I was very happy to see Deepika Padukone has got a Louis Vuitton deal after she went to JNU. So I think it needs also for us as a society to support what we think is media we want to see or journalism we want to see. So when, for instance, if Aamir Khan goes off Snapdeal because the trolls manage to get to them and say, we don't want Aamir, you need as much of an army of people saying, we do want Aamir Khan on Snapdeal. We may not agree with what he said, but he has the right to say it. So the same for Deepika Padukone. You may not like her movie, but she has a right to do what she says. So it's unless the critical masses come out, and I do think, again, that the anti-CA protests have shown that if enough people come out, governments, advertisers, corporates are forced to listen, whether it's about, we talk about government, but it's often about corporate issues as well, which come up. When the strength of we the people is something which nobody can underestimate, and that is something we need to feel more and more today.
And also,
I think also, sir, to answer, I think the answer to your question is, and yes, this is the model that's,
I'm not sure how it would do
yeah,
that.
this is the model that's actually being adopted across the world right now, where viewers/readers/consumers have to start paying for news. If you want news for free, there are journalists who will yell at you for 2 hours for free every night. I promise you, the shouting is for free because the income is coming from somewhere else. You are not the customer of that product. You are the commodity. Your attention span is being commoditized and sold to somebody else. Your relationship with that business is the relationship that chickens have with real good, where you are being packaged and sold to somebody else. If you want to be the end customer whose intelligence and integrity is being respected, you have to be ready to pay for the news, to pay for the work that the journalists are doing, and that's the only way forward, only when you're prepared to pay.
yeah, I was going to say, yeah, exactly my point, Faye, that we all feel a lot of things, but when it comes to paying for news, everyone sort of shrinks and it becomes harder and harder to have this conversation. But this is really I feel one of the only sustainable ways in which we can. Are you willing to fund independent journalists? Do I have to go and ask an editor for money? Can I put up a GoFundMe appeal or find a way that people can fund me to do this kind of journalism that is in the public interest? Is this a sustainable model? I mean, so far it's sort of, it's not really happened, but this is, as you say, many people are trying it. So let's think about this as well, because again, like I said, it's a two-way process, and
yes,
feel free to
participate. A lot of the large organizations overseas have gone subscription, have started subscription models, because that's how you reduce dependency on advertising and increase dependency on your end customer, who is your reader viewer?
We did debate that model for online, but I do think that in a country like India, where our content is so important that it reaches as many audiences, especially the Hindi. In fact, in some of our Hindi shows, often the voices, the most important content we get from people who actually WhatsApp in that we have been waiting for our train for 24 hours. This is not happens every day. These are the stories we get, and I think sometimes we have to look at a way that this kind of journalism must be subsidized, because if we start charging that student in some remote village, he doesn't have the money to pay for it. So we do need to look at a kind of mix of models for India, where we can have perhaps a way that you do have a subscription, but it also must be open model for students, for the poorest of the poor who need to watch that news.
Okay, all three of you have your hands up. You're going to have to nominate one. I give it to the young lady with the yellow scarf.
So my question is to the panel. I'm a media student, so we are also taught that as one of the principles of journalism, entertainment is also a part of educating and informing. So I would like to know that how exactly, do you project your opinions on a media neutral space or zone, especially the social media? I would just like to know that as an individual, because I feel like we all have a voice there, and how do you modulate that?
I think it's about tweeting your opinion on a story while you're supposed to be neutral. Sonia?
Is that it? Is that the question?
How do you project your opinions?
How do you project your opinions according to you? Because you're media personnel, and I would like to know.
Well, we actually have quite strict social media guidelines drafted by me, which says that you can have your opinions, but your opinions must not reflect a bias towards a particular political party in any way, because you represent a certain journalistic ethic or brand. So which does not mean, like for instance, I may think X policy of X government is wrong, but that doesn't mean that I think every policy of theirs is wrong. And the same way that I don't think of another X party that everything they do is right. You have to be what I broadcast on air should not be compromised by what my opinions are on media. And if I seem to be unfair or politically motivated or biased towards one party, that will happen. So there are very strict guidelines. Also, we urge civility. We're often, as I said, trolled, etc. But we do realize that we have to respond in as civil a way as possible. So that's basically what the key thing is.
I might be a small fry, but I have to exercise extra caution when I'm on social media, because if I tend to say something, it could be misconstrued as my organization's viewpoint. So I normally don't do that. I don't do that. And I stick to what the editorial guideline or the opinion is. And I think that's a safe way to go do it.
Stand up. Yes.
Hello ma'am, my question is to you, basically to all of you. So I am a lawyer, my dad's a lawyer too. I'm a lawyer and my dad's a lawyer too. And we both end up going to pro and anti, like if you could figure out the protests. And even being a lawyer and studying and understanding the implications of what this horrendous act can do to our country, we all had to lie to go watch Chapak and things like that. So I just wanted to ask, as a responsible media person, like she also mentioned, and as a fraternity of lawyers, how do you seek this concept to blend in together where something so typical, which only handful of people in this room just understand, privilege, the upper middle class, probably the middle class, but the people when you walk out of this fest, the very people who don't even know what it is, what is a pro concept, what is an anti concept, they're just walking into that protest, or just simply, like one mentioned, giving such things like two people out. So how do you see, as an independent journalist, this thing, and how much do you think is a war for you and for us as well? Because what happened at Tees Azari, what happened at other people fighting as lawyers and supporting the issue, so they've not been treated very well. Even in my own independent household, I had to lie, I had to kind of hide my own opinions. So what to do with all those WhatsApp uncles and the news that should be headlines? So yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Is that for me or you?
Anyone. I think it's about... So if I've understood your question correctly, you're saying that right now you have to hide to have an opinion, effectively, in your workplace, at home, and among your friends. That's just an unfortunate state of affairs. I mean...
I think the most effective answer, and I think actually that has become the simplest, I don't know who came up with that idea, but I think the simplest idea has been the reading of the preamble of the Constitution. Your parents can't get angry with you for that. Your boss can't get angry with you for that. Just say, I don't know where I am, but ye preamble aap pad lijiye. I think that really ends the matter. That is actually the core of the argument. There's no other argument. There's no argument whether you're pro-Congress or pro-BJP or pro-X or pro-Y. The preamble of the Constitution says everyone should be equal. If the act, I think the act, ye karan hai. And bas, that I think is the strongest measure. I think it's a great measure that children are now reading the preamble. But I do have to say, and I won't name the Bollywood star, we had called him to say that we wanted to do for Republic Day a series of prominent people reading the preamble. And he said yes, and his PR called me half an hour later and said, Sonia, you know, we think this is not the right time, his movie is coming. So I said, but what is wrong with him reading the preamble of the Constitution? She said, in these times, even that is seen as taking a stand. So take a stand, read the preamble, and hopefully we all have more guts than some Bollywood stars do.
I think also with social media, again, this is the topic of that 5:30 conversation, but with social media, what's happening is the opinion has become binary. You're either for us or against us. It's possible to not care about anything else, but just simply have an objection to this one law. It's possible to be, right-wing about everything else except this one law. So the nuance of opinion and the nuance of what we care about, what we don't care about has just gone out of the window because you're automatically, either you have to declare yourself from one side or the other, or you get labeled or pigeonholed. And that's the unfortunate, sort of reality of where we are. But you can have varied opinions on varied things. You don't have to, pigeonhole yourself into any one side. And you can reject the label if somebody else is giving it to you.
Absolutely. Be a Modi Bhakt. Or you should all be Modi Bhakts if you want to be, but please realize this law, and that's fine. That's up to you.
And also maybe just ask, instead of having arguments, you're a lawyer, just ask questions. You're probably very good at that. Yeah. And most people respond better to questions that lead to difference of opinions rather than being told, no, you're wrong. And no one likes to be lectured. But asking questions, I found, is a useful way to engage, and very often people will listen to you if you can back up your questions with facts.
Okay, so let's... I have to spread this out. Okay, all right, ask your question. Sonia's a softie.
Hi. My question to you is, so in the media narrative, when a person is harassed or let's say raped, the narrative is usually XYZ is raped. Right. Shouldn't the narrative change instead of using the name of the person who is at the receiving end of such a heinous crime, shouldn't the perpetrator's name come in the narrative? And why are they called victims and not survivors? Because shouldn't the narrative just change how the media is portraying the survivors of such heinous crimes? And also I want to ask, why is media biased towards certain things and unbiased towards certain things? Like, talking about protests that's happening all over the country. The media is mainly focusing on Mumbai and Delhi. There have been protests in Bihar, there have been protests in Bhopal where people are turning up in lakhs. In Mangalore, I don't remember correctly, but 2 students were shot dead by the police and no media covered it. So why is there such a bias in that?
We covered it. We covered it.
If I leave apart a couple...
Okay, one second. All right, so we've heard your question. There are some factual problems with your first question. The law prevents the media from naming survivors or victims of rape in any way. The media doesn't use a name at all. You cannot use the name of the accused because in this country they're innocent until proven guilty. You would be the Hyderabad police if you named someone when they're just accused. When they're declared guilty, pronounced guilty by a court of law, then yes. But till then, we can't make that decision.
Still an accused.
Let's take the Nirbhaya case. So now, for instance, the convicts and their photographs are all over. In fact, luckily, the girl Nirbhaya, we never knew her name because that was the way, because of the law, you can't take the person's name. But the convicts, once they're convicted, the names are all over the place. And I think even in Hyderabad, I think whether they've even accused, their photographs and names are all over the place. But, I mean, of course, I agree with you, the guilt has to be on the perpetrators, not on the person who's gone through this. And survivors, I take the point, in fact, we do call people who have survived survivors, but horrifically, in many cases, they have been killed. Yeah. There are no survivors, so that is also a fact. But I agree with you that the focus should not be so much on the girl's story in some cases that, she was working, she was out alone, because somehow it builds into this narrative that she brought it on herself. So that is something we have to be very careful about, on somehow that this happens to working women or something of that sort. That we have to be very careful about, and more on the people who are accused and convicted. But she's right that we don't have to, that there are strict laws on it. What is another scary thing is, even this has become into some Hindu-Muslim thing. That suddenly you find that if it's a Muslim boy, why haven't you named him because he's Muslim? It's Hindu, you've named him because he's majority. And if they're both Hindu and Muslim, then everyone is confused. So it's actually becoming ridiculous. We need to stick to the facts and be very careful, because these are people's lives. It's a family's trauma. So we have to be very, very careful to not fall into sensationalism in something like rape especially.
No, but then there's a risk of that, right? Whatever you pick that pseudonym to be, you're attributing identity to that person. And there's a risk there. We've run out of time. I'm sorry. It's being pointed out to me. But I understand that the panel will be at the book signing desk after this, where you can catch up with everyone and ask more questions if you have to. But we have to adhere to the time limit that's been given to us. We've run out of time. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful audience. It's been awesome to talk to you. Thank you to the panel. Thank you.
Please join me in thanking our panelists, Ruben Banerjee, Sonia Singh, Taran Khan, in conversation with Faye D'Souza for that wonderful session. And also to remind you that they will be at the book signing tent, which is, if you don't know where it is out of our venue to the left near Mughal tent. Thank you.